Every day there is a forgetting, and every moment there is the possibility of remembering. Remembering who you truly are, awakening to your body, to the inner world, to the experience of being alive. Here is where you find the beauty, the joy, and here is where you free your soma. I'm your host, Amy Takaya. I'm here to help you move from pain to power, from tension to expansion, and ultimately from fear to love. Hello and welcome to Free Your Soma, Stories of Somatic Awakening and How to Live from the Inside Out. I'm Amy Takaya, and today I'm speaking with Stacey Sciacchitano, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist who works with adults who are struggling with anxiety and mood disorders. However, previously, she worked with children on the autism spectrum disorder and their families, doing early intervention work, working in schools to help them adapt and learn certain, behavioral, skills, right? Behavior changes. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about all of that today and about how Stacey has been realizing that there is this disconnect in the way that a lot of therapists are trained, and that really one of the deepest ways that we can make the healing process not only streamlined and more efficient, but also more long lasting is by working with our body, because we're having a body experience as we're alive as human beings. There's no way to get around that. So thank you so much for being here with me, Stacey.
Thank you for having me, Amy. It's great to be here, and it's great to see you.
Yeah, same. We got to meet each other at Joshua Tree Music Festival, actually.
Yes.
Yeah. The moment you started telling me about what you have been experiencing and what you've been up to, I was like, oh, this is gonna click. What we're the stuff that I'm doing and the stuff that you're doing is really gonna click.
Yes, agreed. Agreed. I was like, it was a little bit of divine intervention, I think, in a way.
Absolutely. I love that feeling. Yeah. It's like a little pat on the back, we're coming in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So maybe you can tell our audience just a little bit about your background, a little bit about yourself and how you got into this line of work.
Okay. Sometimes it's a challenge. Like, how far back do I go? I went to undergrad not knowing what the heck I was doing. But I always knew, deep down in my heart, I wanted to help people. So I actually got my undergrad in recreation leisure studies, thinking, oh, you're helping people, leisure or recreate, right? Because that's a whole other part of our life that is necessary in the world, kind of like some play. But also it was working with people with disabilities as well. And after that, I ended up, I really fell in love with camping and hiking while I was there. So funny is, with that major, I went to SUNY Cortland, and they had an outdoor recreation major. And so I kind of got a whole bunch of that. And growing up, I had never been camping, hiking. Mostly my dad was into boats, so we were on the water. So fast forward, we part of our degree was to go on a week-long camping and canoeing backpacking trip. And I just fell in love. And I was like, okay, this is it. I'm going to help people through the outdoors. Go to grad school, realize I don't think I want to live out in the woods 24/7. So I ended up getting my degree in counseling psychology. Then I moved out to San Diego, ended up getting my degree in school psychology, thinking, oh, I could really help kids if I work in the schools. And then you could get the school breaks. At the time, that's what I was thinking. And I ended up kind of moving around a bit, doing different jobs. And when I was going to school out in San Diego, out here, I ended up working in what's called the Learning Center at National University. And this woman came in, and she came in a couple times. She goes, you know what? She goes, I think you might like this field of work that I'm doing. Because her and I would get to talking, and I was like, yeah, I could use some extra money. So it's this program. They work with kids with autism, but it was an after school program, and it was a socialization program. And what they do was interesting is they have you observe first before you even apply. Well, you apply for the job, and if you're interested, then they have you observe. Because I think it's not a job where you can fake it. right? You either want to help people that weren't really into it, they just never lasted. So start this job, really like, I just really liked working with the kids and then working with the families. And that's how I ended up getting into this whole field of what's called ABA, applied behavior analysis, of going into the homes, going into schools, working with kids on the spectrum, working with their families. And then down the line, also work with like teenagers, young adults, even some couples, which was interesting. And then through that, I ended up getting my hours and getting licensed as a marriage and family therapist here in California. At the time, that was the only designee for people with their masters. So you could have your licensed MFT, or you would go on to get your psychology, your doctorate. Now they have what's called a licensed professional counselor. So that could be another designee. Yeah, so I ended up becoming what's called becoming a supervisor in this ABA field, working with kids with autism, where we create programs to help the kids. The idea is to help them decrease the gaps. Really, it's between like their ability, right, and their potential. But of course, there was assessments and everything, so you kind of looked at where did they need the most help. And especially working with the really young kids, we really started at a lot of times at ground zero, because sometimes we're working at 3.5-year-olds just to make a request for something, just to say hello, learn to wash their hands, things like that. And then came just supporting the family and working with the parents, usually the mom, but.
Wow. Yeah. So I think it's really interesting that, you started in a totally different direction with something that was actually very physical and nature-based movement in your body, moving around, going on these hikes. And it was something that kind of was this opening, this awakening for you to a whole nother part of yourself, probably that you didn't even know before. Because you said as a child, you didn't go on those kind of expeditions, right? So that was like this opening. And what I find curious about it is that there's a lot of studies now that show that spending time in nature, and moving our body in these rhythmic ways is so essential to our well-being. And, it's interesting that they even have a degree that they call like recreation and leisure that's about simply walking in the woods,
Yep.
or going on a hike. Like it's become this thing that we're no longer just naturally doing in the world. It becomes this thing that's now like a special other thing you have to plan for and take time off and have enough money to be able to take time off to do it, right? But it's
Right.
a supernatural thing to human beings or living creatures in general, right? To just simply be in nature and move your body.
Did you know that your muscles are holding on to thoughts, memories, and feelings? If you have a tight neck or back, you're not just getting old, you're experiencing a buildup of tension from the life you've lived. Most people don't know this, but there is a part of your brain that can reverse and prevent chronic tension. When you relax your muscles, you not only move better and regulate your nervous system, but you also free yourself from the grip the past has over your body. So you can live with freedom, confidence, and enjoy your life now. How does that sound? Join me, Amy Takaya, and discover what my clients are raving about at youcanfreeyoursoma.com.
Yeah, and even as you're saying this, it makes me think about what's the comparison of, where we had more nature around us to now we have more concrete around us if you live in the city, right? And also too is, as you were saying that, it reminded me how I actually grew up Catholic with a religion. I always questioned it, even at a very young age. I questioned it because I was like, what? People don't come back alive. Anyway, that was another piece of it. After I had done that outdoor trip, I started hiking more. And I was like, it's also to me was like this connection. I didn't know it at the time, but it's like a connection to this, I want to say just spirituality, like the universe, that it's bigger than us. And also too, as I've aged and just matured, it's like, it really shows how we all are really connected, right? It's the human's thinking brain that kind of, I think, with all the other stuff, like can separate us from that.
Yes, and getting in touch with, being in nature and moving your body, you know, going on a hike and all of those things are dramatically different than sitting 8 hours at a desk, like looking at a screen, or even sitting across, you know, from a table talking to somebody. That's not like a very, you know, physical experience. That can end up becoming a very mental experience in some ways, right?
Yes.
Where we might
Yeah.
start living in our heads or thinking that, you know, the world is happening in our heads when it's actually, there's a whole other section of our humanity that we're not even noticing as we're sitting there, right? And
Yes.
so it's just interesting to me that you started in that field and then you moved into working with children on the autism spectrum disorder, because a lot of children on the autism spectrum disorder, their issues are not just, you know, their ability to pay attention or their ability to socially interact. Their physical challenges as well. There's motor issues that they have where they're not able to control the way their body moves, or they're not able to organize, you know, certain activities that most people just take for granted. Can you say a little bit about what you noticed with children on the spectrum?
Yes, most definitely. The exact terminology is escaping me right now, but one thing with the kids sometimes, and it wasn't always an either or, but sometimes the kids would be I can't remember what the word is, but it's they're like understimulated and
They're
their
still
muscle, yeah, but they'll be understimulated and even their muscle tone is real like soft. And those are a lot of times the kids that would have, you know, just trouble with even just walking or running or throwing. And then you have the kids that are the opposite, are really tense and really tight.
hypertonic,
Yes, exactly.
the
Exactly.
hypermobile and the hypertonic, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So there was that, right? And then there was like where they're at in space. A lot of them like proprioception don't know where they're at in space. And then they have that vestibular piece, right? They're able to like purposely move things. So, right, it's for them, it's their brain is arranged differently. And I know we know a lot more now than when we did even 10 years ago. But even just noticing from like, because what we did was I supervised the people that worked firsthand with the kids. And I also did that myself. But what I would notice is when they're really young, they'd be getting all kind of services, including occupational therapy. And OT would be able to address some of this motor movement. Even some of the kids got some PT, but the OTs were kind of the ones who were looking at the motor movements. But by the time they're in school, it was like they weren't, it's like, oh, they aged out of that, or there's not a service available to pay for it. And the schools where it's like it has to be school related for them to address it. But what I noticed is a lot of times it was like, how about getting the kid ready to learn, right? If we're doing, so the ABA is a lot about what they call trials. So it's repetition, right? They're going to learn the name of a dog because they're repeating it, repetitiously repeating it. But right, if you have a kid that's overstimulated or even understimulated, it's harder to get their attention. And it's like, I know they know what this is, right? But their attention might be here and there, or their body movements. So it was like, a lot of times it was like, well, how can we get them ready to learn? And I'd always was like, gosh, I wish we could have more of a plan to address the motor part of the what's happening in the body.
Right. As you're saying that, I'm thinking about these different things that I learned when I was a child. I was lucky enough to attend Waldorf school for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And they have all these motor things that they do with kids. That there's other forms of this now. There's something called brain gym that they also do in some
I know
schools and
brain
stuff.
gym.
Yeah, so they did that stuff with us in Waldorf, but they did it with like songs and games. So they have you moving your arms and singing a song and doing this rhythmic kind of learning where then you're going to remember, just like if anybody, you know, we all remember our ABCs because of the little song. If we just tried to say A, B, C, D, and we just said it really straight, it would be much, much harder to memorize that. But because there's a little tune that goes with it, you know, or if you've ever, you know, these things like, you know, mnemonics, where you try to memorize something by associating it with something else, you know, or if you're physically, like, if you physically do something, you know, like I've met people, there was one person who said that they would like, sometimes like if they were trying to remember people's names, they would like clap a little bit, or they would like make a little, you know, clap when they would say the person's name so that they would remember it better. Because you're actually, then you're not just trying to like take it in terms of memorization or memory, you're actually embedding it in like a lived experience, right? So
Yes.
I imagine that those kind of things would have been really beneficial if they were doing a lot of that kind of stuff. Maybe they were, but even more, that's going to get your attention more than just someone asking you to repeat something over and over. You're not getting your
Exactly.
attention. Start singing a song, and the kid's probably going to
Exactly.
look.
Exactly. Oh no, yeah, the music therapy. And it's just the sad thing is it's like it's the funding. That's the sad part. Because like just how you said, you reminded me, we used to use songs. I used to run the social skills groups. And we would use song. We would even use something called social stories where you like make the story really short but pertain to whatever it is the child is like dealing with. And it was again about repetition. But like you said, like I would write the story, but if let's say they loved trains, well then I would use trains as the reference and the main part of the story, and maybe give a train with their name to it, right? So they have this connection to it. And the music, I wish music could be more part of like all kids learning more so than it
Yeah,
is.
right there, the funding and the access to this, because I didn't get to stay in Waldorf school because of finances.
Mhm.
It's a private school usually, and it can be quite expensive. And versus like public school is free. Whatever insurance is going to cover for occupational therapy, and they're going to only cover what they think is needed. So maybe once the kid's in school, it's like mission accomplished. They don't need it anymore. But the truth is that our brains are going to keep developing, and we can help that child become more and more functional instead of kind of hitting a ceiling.
Yes. What you're talking about reminds me of you're more meeting the whole child, right? And I would also imagine, right, if I'm feeling, right, if talking about kids on the spectrum and they might have trouble with proprioception or vestibular, right, or hypertonic, or you said hypotonic, if they're not feeling grounded in their body, well then isn't it so much harder to do things that are challenging, like socialize, go into public places that might be a little bit noisy? Because some of the kids also have like sensory sensitivities, right?
Yes.
And
And
so
also very physical. They're
yes,
bothered by the sensations on their skin from certain fabrics, or the way that, things are feeling when they come in contact with them, the way that food feels in their mouths, certain textures, and stuff like that can be very upsetting and alarming to them because of the way they're perceiving it.
yes, right. And you're not going to tell them, well, you can, like, okay, let's take 3 deep breaths, but I think they need a little bit more than just taking 3 deep breaths. That just reminded me, they actually used to have this brushing protocol. Well, they would do with a lot of the young ones, which was supposed to be calming. The
Mm.
OTs would teach that.
Yeah, I have some colleagues that have, taught me different techniques. Like, and some parents that have worked with OTs have known these things. Like when I've met
Mhm.
another mom and she has a kid who's on the spectrum, and we, talk a little bit about things that she finds, that help him. Like some children like squeezing, so they like
Mhm.
squeeze their arms, but other
Yep.
kids don't like the pressure. They don't
Right.
like squeezing. So you have to do like a light sweeping without the squeezing, but then another kid is not going to like the sweeping. So it's so individual because everybody's
Right.
nervous system is wired individually. And so I think there's a lot of, exploration that has to be, given space in this kind of, work. Did you feel like you were able to when you experienced working with a child for a period of time, like what did that length of time look like? Like how frequently were you seeing them, and for how long until it was kind of like game over?
It's a good question. It depended on the age of the kid, and after there was assessments, right? How many goals were there? But the like the little ones, we would work with them 5 days a week, and we would work with them at a minimum for a year and a half. Because right, if
Yeah.
you're 3 years old, that brings you to 4.5. When the kids started getting school age is when insurance and regional center wants you to taper off, because they're like, well, the school can start doing it, right? But
Mm.
the school doesn't hit all parts of your life. Kids on average, right? A little bit older kid would be maybe 3 days a week, 2 hours at a time. And then in the schools, a lot of times we ended up working with the kids that the school just couldn't work with. And unfortunately, it was that they usually had like a really aberrant behavioral problem that resulted in usually some kind of like violence a lot of times, or just aberrant behaviors where they're so disruptive and the school just is like, I don't know what to do. And usually they have parents that are really good advocates or get a good advocate. um, so that would be, their whole school day, but we are also be shadowing them in their classes and whatnot, but really helping them to learn, and also, behavioral intervention with those behaviors. Because a lot of times, right, there's a function to a behavior.
Yeah, it has a
Right?
purpose.
Exactly. And a lot with these kids, it's escape, not a lot, but the basic learning theory is escape, avoid, or gain. And then there's what's called self-stimulatory behaviors. There's no outside really trigger or anything. It's just like, some of those repetitive behaviors and I think a lot of times it's calming. It's something they could depend on. It's something that their mind and body came up with, like, this feels good.
And also, any of those behaviors, that you could just kind of name, whether they're trying to gain something or avoid something, it's, or they're stimulating themselves, it's in response to something they're experiencing. It's in response to something that is being experienced through their body.
Yep.
And they may not be able to describe that or tell you what that is. But if you spend enough time with a kid, you can start to figure out what it is that they're reacting or responding to in their environment, right? Or in their internal environment of how their body feels at that moment.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what we did. We analyzed behavior, function of the behavior. What's the antecedent, meaning what happened right before. So it's like you're looking kind of what the trigger. It's like, well, is there anything we could be doing beforehand so they don't have to get to that point? And you're also teaching them skills on the other side of it. Because maybe a kid's having a tantrum because they don't want to go outside because PE's saying you have to kick a ball and they can't kick a ball. Right. And so it's just the whole thing of like, this is too hard, or kids cannot be so nice and make fun of other kids, and right. Yeah. So they're like, I'm going to avoid this. So you teach them what's on the other hand of that, of teaching them some coping skills. And then if they do want to learn to kick a ball because they want to play with their classmates, it's like, well, let's break it down and teach you to kick the ball.
Yeah. It actually sounds like, till they're in school, there's a lot of attention that kids can receive. This kind of therapy sounds like really great in a lot of ways. And so much of it, being kind of goal oriented, I feel like it would be interesting to see what would happen if it was more like, I guess, like more motor oriented. Right. And I'm curious here, like some of these interventions, the physical kinds of interventions, what might it look like? And maybe you have an answer to this, when a person who has maybe they're somewhere on the spectrum, right? Diagnosed or undiagnosed, perhaps, and they grow up and they have certain kinds of challenges. Maybe they struggle with anxiety or different kinds of mood disorders, and what kind of help they're going to be getting when they start to see a therapist versus what kind of help they might have gotten when they were 2 or 3 years old.
Right.
To address the same kinds of difficulties in function, right? If being able to go out and do things because they're too anxious, or or not being able to perform certain tasks because they have these reactions to life that get in the way. Can you say a little bit about like that journey of a person, like as they're an adult now, what would have been beneficial for them to have that same kind of like close attention?
Yeah, I think that's the downfall, is they get all this intense early intervention, and then when they get to school, it's more about like scholastics, unless they're deemed quote unquote severe, and then they put into these classrooms that are more like functional daily living skills, kind of basic classes. And then what's interesting is, so in California, we have what's called the regional centers, and it manages all that state and federal monies for people with a long life disability, but developmental disability. So they serve 0 to 99. If you are able to get qualified for the regional, and usually it's before you're 18, sometimes it'll be after because you got diagnosed earlier. They actually do have some decent services for what they call that transitional aged youth. But really, it really still just addresses daily living type of functional skills, meaning, can you go out to the store and maybe buy something. It depends on the kids like level of functioning, how affected they are by the autism. And then also do they also have a, an intellectual disability delay. But the after school interventions kind of fade away a bit. Unless, like I said, unless you have a parent that's a really good advocate. And unfortunately in our system, which happens all over with other things, is you get services when you're not doing well.
Yeah. I
Right.
was thinking that while you were speaking, I was thinking about this term high functioning,
Yep.
which is they use for someone on the spectrum who can go out to the store and buy something, who can get in a car and drive, who
Mm-hmm.
can sit there and have like a relatively normal conversation with you.
Yep.
But what they still experience ongoingly in their body and in their living experience and their ability to actually maintain, relationships and experience happiness or experience success is perhaps still limited, but they're not
Mm-hmm.
going to be getting that same kind of attention as someone else who is more in a severe state and who is less functional. So it's kind of one of these things where like you just said, if you have more difficulties, you get more help versus people who are
Yep.
still struggling and are just kind of like, well, you're fine, you're good enough. You can function, you can provide like a certain level of, contribution to society or like take care of yourself. So see ya.
Right, exactly. And even though they might still be suffering, like you said, and as adults, it does kind of manifest as like anxiety or bipolar disorder or depression or OCD or ADHD, which ADHD I think can be it is a whole separate diagnosis. But yes, agree wholeheartly with you. I mean, right, and that can look into our bigger society, how that same thing happens, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it's kind of unfortunate because I feel like the kind of education that you were providing to these really young children is, I mean, ideally that kind of education should be available to anybody who needs
Mhm.
it, regardless of their actual like, functional ability. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
Like
absolutely.
I'm one of those people. I mean, I started therapy when I was young, and I thought, therapy did such a lot for me,
Mhm.
even just traditional talk therapy, which is where most people start, right, before they
Right.
go into other realms and somatic therapies and things like this. But it's like we think that that's just for people who have problems versus maybe like you could, be really out there and say that it's a right for another human being to have a safe and supportive
Yes.
place to express themselves fully and be understood and guided by a professional who, does that, who knows what they're doing. Like that should be something that we see as a culture as being beneficial to everybody, not just somebody who is on the verge of, like losing their job or committing
Right.
suicide or going through a divorce. Like why do we have to wait till there's a disaster of some kind
Right.
before we start doing something like
Right.
get a kind, loving person to talk with?
Right. No, I wholeheartedly agree. I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I think partially good thing is probably in this, even just this decade or part of the last one, it's like therapy, getting help is more accepted. Um, I think people in their like 20s and 30s, they're more like, yes, everyone. I mean, well, of course, it's the people I work with. They're like, everyone should get therapy. I'm like, I agree. But it's exactly what you're saying. And I think it's partly too is undoing the patterns of the past that no longer serve us any longer.
Mm,
Right. It's
right.
that's and comparing that to like a person on the spectrum who could use therapy, I think that's what I think a disservice is to the adults and the young adults, besides if they're in the regional center, is yeah, they can get talk therapy, but even just me being a therapist and having so much experience with autism, I think only a certain subset can benefit from just talk therapy. I think it needs to be more kind of like including something of like what you're doing, I think would be amazing. Like if I was a parent and had a kid on the spectrum and a young adult or even an adult child on a spectrum, I would absolutely encourage them. Like let's give this a try. Cause I do think it's that, how your body sends you messages, but they just lack kind of understanding of it. right? And even you don't need to like with what you do, you don't have to cognitively understand it. You have someone like you guiding them through it, right? And you're also creating that safe container to guide them through these exercises, which I could see benefiting somebody to just be a little bit more in their body.
Absolutely. I mean, what I do is immediately building proprioceptive neural pathways that didn't exist before, and actually reminding their body of functional movement patterns that they were born to experience, like functional patterns of walking, functional patterns of standing. And what's really interesting about, somatics and the way that it helps people with autism spectrum disorder and ADHD is that what's going on in a lot of kids, let's take ADHD, for example, they're having difficulty sitting still because there are motor patterns that are running in their autonomic nervous system that make them want to stand and move around. And so it's physically uncomfortable for them to sit in a chair for periods of time because their brain is firing their muscles to move, right? And that's why you see them twitching or tapping or doing any of these things we might call stimming, is because that's what their brain is doing. It's running these motor patterns. And when we start doing motor patterns in a conscious way and then slowly letting it go, like in somatics, we teach the brain to actually inhibit those motor patterns that are getting in the way of them simply being able to sit still. So it's a process of not only reminding their brain of the function that they were born to experience, right? And every human's body has the capacity to experience, right? Regardless of whether, even people who are born, with cerebral palsy or born, arms, like there's function they can get to experience. There's ways they can learn to move whatever body they have in a more functional way. Like that's available to our human vessel. But in order to get that to happen, sometimes there needs to be a quieting and a reduction of the motor patterns first, so that they can actually experience that change in that function. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Well, I was just thinking about likening that to, because my niche is anxiety. I've dealt with it my whole life unknowingly, especially in like overanalyzing, overthinking. My dad's dealt with it. His sisters dealt with it, right? It's kind of a generational predisposition to it. But it just got me thinking about how that mind-body connection, right? And anxiety, like a generalized anxiety, is the worrying and the what ifs, but it's really to keep us safe, right? But that fight, flight, or freeze, right? It doesn't happen when the trigger happens. It's anticipation of the trigger, right? And so
we're already expecting it.
And this idea that things fires together, wires together, right? And we have these big traumas and these little traumas, and this body, right? The neurons, something happens, it fires these neurons, and now they're wired together. But then it's creating in our whole system, now the body and the mind have a defensiveness to whatever this trigger is, if it's a real or perceived threat, right? Nowadays, more, I think higher percentages perceived threat, but I know it's based off of what's happened to us in the past.
Right. And we have better ways of measuring now too, which is part of it. Better ways of measuring. And we're doing more of that kind of research to find out what people have been experiencing. So, and then there are other factors that play into this, like the sedentary lifestyles that people have. And going back to the first part of our conversation, that people aren't, connected to moving around in nature on the earth, but are spending time away from the earth and not able to connect, with that part of ourselves really that exists when we go out in nature. There's a quieting of your nervous system, for many people when you go out into nature, and a calming that occurs, and places that are very like, stimulating and bright and have lots of lights, and say like a busy city or something like that is going to be very stimulating to your nervous system in a different way. And so more and more people are experiencing that as their normal, and they're not experiencing this quiet, reduced stimulation, right?
Oh yeah, I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, that's true. Them anymore. It's not their natural experience. They're used to being stimulated. And so when they go into nature and there's nothing, or if someone's ever had the experience of like losing their phone for a few days and they don't
Yeah.
have a phone, you get to see how conditioned you are to like be interacting all the time with this little like glowing rectangle that, feeds you information, and feeds you stimulation, right?
Yes, I often notice, and I get it, that like when people are waiting for things, it's right away the phone comes out. And I do it sometimes. A lot of times I just purposely don't take it out because I'm like, I'm not gonna be like everybody else, and I don't need to be in the phone. And I know it's maybe a way to like be comfortable with just standing there, not right. But back in the day, people maybe would talk to each other instead, or you can notice what's maybe happening, or what if you're waiting outside, you can see the sky and the trees. But like you said, everyone's like in their phone, and it I think it does create a disconnect.
Yeah. And like for people who have anxiety, you notice that they are much more either like they're more prone to having an unhealthy relationship with their phone.
Oh yeah, and I hear a lot of them talk about being on social media and like, I know I shouldn't compare myself, but using that as like a comparison type of thing. And and I do talk about helping people who are overthinkers, like they like to analyze. And that's also because that's where I came from, this overanalyzing, overthinking things, and come to find out it's another safety behavior. I mean, I think it's beneficial in some ways, but it's also a safety behavior. But I used to think, because on that job with the kids with autism, we used to drive around a lot. I used to deal with a lot of things at the same time. And sometimes I'd be like, I feel so exhausted, but bodily, I didn't really do much. It was all like, but it almost felt like your head is separated from your body because you're so much in your head, right? And the antidote to that is what? Is to get a little bit more into your body. And that's one thing when I met you, I was saying was I literally had just like come to the conclusion. I'm just at where I'm at in my journey of being a therapist. And I am very interested in the whole incorporating the body. Like in psychology, there's somatic, Peter Levine, somatic experiencing, and then I forgot the other lady's name, but also too realizing maybe that's just where I'm at now, more helping people through talking, but I think also through their spirit is really my underlying like secret thing. I try to get people to be in touch with themselves, to be in flow, to be where they're like, where are you when you feel good or connected or calm? Who are you with when you're connected and calm? And
Yeah.
maybe calm being, it could have stimulation, but it's like a sense of like peace or a sense of awe, right?
Yeah.
Where are you when that's happening?
Do you ever invite your clients, when they're working through something, to just notice their body or to notice how they feel in their body? Like one, simple thing I think a lot of therapists can use is that they
Mhm.
just simply ask them to feel, their feet on the floor, ask them to
Yes.
feel hips in the chair. And
Yes.
then there's a feeling coming up that's really strong, where in their body are they feeling
Yes.
that feeling?
Yes.
And then when they're feeling good, when they're feeling some relief, where do they feel that relief?
Yes.
That's a simple way to just invite them to sense, and build a connection that's beyond just their mental, their mental capacity.
Yes. That is actually one of the main ways you get people. So, you know, like you, right? You're targeting where people are holding where the tension is, right?
Yeah. Build up.
Yes. So I'm often targeting where the tension is like in their memory.
Mm.
But I will use like, okay, where do you feel that in your body? What does that feel like? And sometimes you have them like, does it have a shape? Does it have a color? But then it's also like, well, when can you remember having this feeling before? When's one of the earliest times you can remember having this feeling? And a lot of times that's when, oh my gosh, I remember that time in fifth grade and those girls were making fun of me and blah, 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 blah. And on top of that, though, what I've been learning more of is what you were saying about also when is a time where you felt grounded in your body. Like,
Yeah.
right? Or peace. Like, when is a time where you felt that, and also connect them to that, because because I don't want to just, even though I'm licensed with the state of California, I work with insurance companies, so it's a lot symptom based, right? But I'm looking to expand my practice outside of that. I want to help people like uncover, because I think it's already there, their own knowledge, their own strengths, their own joy, their own peace, their own compassion, their own connection, right? And help them to be going where they want to be going and be the kind of person that they want to be.
Right. That's
Right.
beautiful. That's a way forward versus kind of, if we stay stuck in what's wrong or what's not working, right? We're staying
Yeah.
kind of stuck in the past, or we're kind of replaying what's not working and we're focusing on that, versus you can do some of that. And then the next step is like inviting people to connect with what is working, what part of them is
Yeah.
functioning, what part of them does feel well. And I do that a lot when I'm working with people in pain, because they're focusing on the pain. The pain is still there. Okay, well, can we also feel that while there is this pain in your back or your shoulder, your left leg is actually feeling pretty good? Your left
Yes.
leg actually feels pretty relaxed. Can we be with both of those things and accept
Yes.
they both exist in you right now? And this
Yes.
pain, we can keep working with it to help it let go. And part of that is reminding your body that it can feel good and that it can feel relaxed, right? And that there
Yes.
is a path forward, and we don't just have to keep reliving these same patterns from the past.
Right. And that's right. Our brain kind of is wired to look at the negative. We have a negative bias just because we're looking
Right.
at what's going to keep us safe. So it's like people like you and me that could, right, to help people remind them of that. Remember this.
Yeah, to help them find the function,
Yes.
to find where it's working, where what's working in them, because we can, like you said, just that self-protection mode when you're living there, when that's your reality. And that's a big part of like anxiety and all kinds of
Yes.
disorders, is you're just living there, and I would even go to say that like someone who's on the spectrum is having a bodily experience of being in kind of stuck in their pattern, stuck in the
Yeah.
way the body does things. And what's so beautiful about somatic work in general is that it, invites you to find that way forward. So,
Mhm.
don't consider yourself at this point to be a somatic therapist. The fact that you're even thinking about this stuff, that you have this background with connecting to nature and connecting to like, the way that our bodies are designed to function, I would say that that is leading into a more somatic approach that you're gradually cultivating and probably going to keep cultivating.
Yes, I would like to. That other one I couldn't remember what it was called sensory motor psychotherapy. Pat
Yeah.
Ogden. That I just bought her book. It's like this thick.
No, I
But
mean, I love it. I
yeah,
love how it's out there.
yes. And I totally agree with you. And I was just what you were saying too, also just reminded me of that's also the patterns with the ways of thinking. And that's what rumination and overthinking, overanalyzing, we have these grooves that we're so used to having. It's our maybe our safety behavior. That's why I like to help people like, let's find a new path. Let's find a different path forward. Let's change the channel on that. But I could see how, right? I wonder, because I kind of feel like what you do and what I do is such a amazing compliment, and it's like I could just see it work in conjunction just so incredibly well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because I'm not a therapist in terms of the talk therapy thing, but the work that I do helps relieve a
Yes.
lot of pressure that people experience. It gets rid of kind of the things that are in the way of experiencing their emotions or experiencing what's underneath that clenched tight body, or that like lifeless feeling, like kind of empty, numb experience that people have. And so when I have clients who do this work alongside talk therapy or alongside working with the therapist, like their growth and their recovery from whatever's going on is just accelerated. Absolutely. So I totally agree. And it's just been so lovely to talk with you and
You as well.
hear your story and just be, kind of sharing and open with everybody about the different things that you've seen and how this work has been evolving for you as a practitioner over the years. If people are curious about your practice, or anyone in the San Diego area, because I know that's where you're based out of, right? And they're listening and they want to get in touch with you,
Mhm.
how can they reach you?
The easiest way is to just go on my website. It's staceytherapysandiego.com. And I'm doing telehealth, so I actually also work with people all over the state of California.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm creating a program for it's going to be like anxiety relief program. So I'm now working on that. I hope to be getting that out there soon, and it's going to be more of like a coaching program. So I'm hoping to be able to reach more people, whoever wants the help and feels that we could work well together.
Excellent. Yes, I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And, if anybody wants to reach out to Stacey, I'll have her website in the show notes, and you can learn more about what she does, especially if you're someone who's struggling with anxiety. She might be the person for you. So yeah, thanks so much. We'll see you again.
Amy.
Hey there, friend. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I would love to hear your thoughts. Follow me on Instagram at Amy Takaya and send me a DM about this episode. I'd like to thank you for being part of this somatic revolution. And if you'd like to support the podcast and help more people learn about somatics, consider leaving a review or a rating. And finally, if you'd like to have the experience of relief in your tight hips or back and learn to understand what your body is really saying to you, visit youcanfreeyoursoma.com. I can't wait to share with you what is truly possible. Bye for now.